Maneva na sema PENDREAM TV. PENDREAM TV de osia dem yopo.
Mema obi biara kwa ba eba PENDREAM TV. Say we are new to the channel. Subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell on so like Jumadi and share my afofron so and Kabi. Now within the space of best 2 to 3 years in yen. Coup d'etat ahodo akoso ewa West Africa ha. Menka ikrano, I know 5 of coups happened ewa Africa ha. And about also I see ewa Central Africa, which is Gabon. Now coup ya esi diplomat ne afenso no security expert ekasa. And sema omokane say enye and I said that is not the end of the coups in Africa. Name we should expect more coup d'etats in Africa. So we see analysis from Al-Wahab Farouka, oye international diplomatic consultant. Anytime I reacted to coup bia ebesi ewo Africa habiana, that is what he says. Now and then deputy communications for the National Democratic Congress. I a friend of Malik Basintale. And also I reacted to coup esi ewo Gabon. The warning I'm a president Nana Addo Akufo-Addo. And I feel so no Ghana ha and kofua omokabia ewom efa ya security and sensem. Me pesa obekame hone yakoti and sema Malik Basintale eka. And send a bekono subscribe to channel and click on notification bell no so like Jumadi no na share ma afofron so and Kabi. PENDREAM TV war another platform my friend of PENDREAM forum. A hono yaje wadwentre on matters arising in Ghana and Africa as a whole. Now better say over Sunday or message in the afa number ya eda uscreen so no ebe publish ama sign so at wonka. And don't forget subscribe to PENDREAM TV or subscribe to PENDREAM forum. Number near 0277 128 777. Mami see number no to be number near 0277 128 777. Kameho na yentie sane Malik Basintale ekanense.
And we're joined for the first time by Malik Basintale, who is one of the deputies to Sami Jamefi, National Communications Officer. So he's a Deputy National Communications Officer of the National Democratic Congress. Malik, good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's important that you join this discussion, share your thoughts with us when we are discussing the issues. The numbers, you can send a message or a WhatsApp message to 055 991 9802. That is our WhatsApp and text message number. But if you're watching us on Facebook, feel free to use the comment section, share a thought or two on the discussion we will be having. And thank you once again for choosing the Mother World Talk Shows. Alaji. Let's start from Gabon. What has happened in the Gabon, the military takeover, and I'll start extreme right with Malik Basintale on this. Malik, once again, welcome.
Thank you very much. Feels good to be here. Good morning to the senior most comrade, Uncle Kwesi. Good morning to Lawyer Dankwa. Good morning to Jifa. And good morning to our cherished viewers and listeners across board. With issues of Gabon, I think one thing cuts through all the nations that have had coup d'etats in most recent times, from Mali to Guinea to Burkina, and now we're experiencing that of Niger. In fact, even before that, we had Chad. We must be critical, first of all, on the concerns being raised in these countries. One, it's either got to do with a repetition, a repeated cycle of governance. Either one party, through some means, have decided to stay long in power, or one family, through some means, have decided to stay long in power. We've also had issues that's got to do with corrupt practices, and I think that cuts across. If you look at all these countries that have gone into coup d'etats in most recent times, you realize that amidst economic hardships, amidst excruciating poverty, amidst high cost of living, you still have a government that intends siphoning the little resources of persons in these countries. Now, a critical example are the economic policies that have been instituted in some of these countries. Now, you have a system where money that's supposed to be circulated for many people in these countries to have hold of are seated in the houses of top political apparatchiks. 2 days ago, when the president of Gabon's house was searched, we all saw the huge sums of monies that were brought out of his room. I watched a video where he sat and helplessly pleaded with friends and sympathizers all across the world to, come to his rescue and come to his aid. And so now all I asked myself is, one, the fall of a great man, becomes so pathetic. But critically, if you listen to Agạinṣt over the time, one thing he's consciously advised this current government about, and even past governments, is your ability to listen to the citizenry at all points in time and at every point in time. We, the governments, at some point in time, assume a state of autonomy, assume a state of independence, independence of the people, independence of the law, and nobody at every point in time is willing to even listen to the opinion of any other person. And mind you, all these coup d'etats landed or started from the doorsteps of their electoral commissions. So we are not different from some of these countries. Today, an inter-party advisory committee that was set up to advise the electoral commission is being sidelined. First, many people who thought it was a challenge with the NDC, and the NDC was so confrontational and all of you. 2 weeks ago, they went into a meeting that had to do with electoral fortunes, only for 7 political parties to leave the meeting, hold a press conference, and accuse the electoral commission, the current electoral commission, of not listening to their concerns. Go through all these countries that we've had coup d'etats. They first had to do with electoral rigging, electoral malpractices. And the people thought that their will wasn't properly projected. And so the only refuge they had was to back the military in their particular jurisdictions and then support them to turn around the government. That is one. 2 are the economic hardships. Look, as a government, you must consistently remember that you have been voted by the people to do the will of the people. And now I've said times and number, and probably that's why in 2020 we had the People's Manifesto. You cannot give the people what they haven't requested for. If you come to my community and we request for a shoe, that is why we voted for you. So amidst 100 promises, if you had a promise that had to do with giving us a shoe in there and we voted for you, we expect that you deliver on why we voted for you. That is the essence of government. And that is why people are always there to vote for you to come into office. And so if you decide to assume power and you decide to do what the people haven't requested from you, or you decide not to do at all, there will be a point in time where the people will resist oppressors' rule. And I have also said that in countries where it's very difficult for people to have platforms to express their concerns, like what is about to happen. I listened to Agạinṣt, and clearly, one thing he said that struck me was that he will never stage a coup, but he cannot stop a coup from happening anywhere in the world. He won't stage a coup because he has platforms to express his sentiments. But if it gets to a point where those concerns are unable, or he's unable to express all these concerns, he feels like venting out, then we get to a point where people will definitely have to resist oppressors' rule. Are you aware? And I have consistently said this. One of the reasons why you have the military always fronting such takeovers is that it is one of the few institutions that cannot churn out their anger. They are one of the few bodies that cannot speak like we are doing here. They are one of the few bodies that cannot demonstrate, not even demonstrate in their own barracks. As we speak today, for over 4 months, Goel hasn't supplied fuel to all military barracks in Ghana. For 4 months. And you can call any military personnel. As we speak today. And so all military vehicles you see moving are moving on their own foot. Not a single drop of fuel has been supplied to them. These people cannot vent their concerns like we are doing today. And so, Senator, with issues of Gabon, I think that the ECOWAS has done so well to some extent. At least they have resisted the thoughts of some few presidents among them. And there are a few people who have disassociated themselves from the wild thoughts of persons who thought that invading Gabon was the way to go. I'm happy that other international organizations are stepping in to guard these practices. And if we don't find amicable ways of resolving some of these challenges, look, it will keep happening and happening. People have predicted, senior stalwarts, people who followed elections in different countries have predicted that we won't have coups in just these 5 countries. Many more are yet to come in other African countries. But you see, it is easy to predict where next a coup will happen. Gabon didn't take anybody by surprise. People who had been following issues, people who had been following what had been happening, knew that the next stop was Gabon. If you push anybody who has followed politics internationally, the person can rightly tell you where next a coup will happen. And you don't need any spiritual incarnation to arrive at that conclusion. You need to look at virtually 3 parameters. One, you need to look at the suppression of the will of the people in countries that the will of the people is being suppressed. You have to look, 2, about countries where money, the velocity of money is being stagnated, where money is unable to change hands, where money is sitting in people's bedrooms, where money is under people's beds, where money is in people's kitchen cabinets. If you look at countries of that sort, then you have an idea. And third, you need to look at countries that are being mismanaged, and to the extent that we have high cost of living. If you put all these 3 together, you would know where next a coup will happen. We in Ghana, President Mahama has repeatedly said it. Everybody has said it. We will continue to go to the polls. We will continue to vote for a change of government. We'll continue to vote for the rightful government. We'll continue to live with governmental policies, and we'll continue to respect and improve upon our democratic credentials in this country. However, it is also not an avenue or not a corridor for governments to keep suppressing the will of the people, for governments to keep mismanaging the little resources available to them, and for governments to keep doing what they want to do at every given time. And so those are my concerns surrounding Gabon.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Malik. Let me move to Lawyer Piala.
So let me take this opportunity to wish your lovely viewers a very good morning, and Uncle Cȯup, first time meeting Basintale, and I must say a very powerful submission that has on all falls with. And also with Jifa, and a good morning to Jifa. Like I said, I think Basintale has done a very good job. I'll only add to what he's saying, and then my concern would regard why are we here in Africa? Why are we unable to sustain democracy? Why is it that we are unable to create a society, a system where democracy, the principles of democracy, and then when we say democracy here, we must be, in my view, liberal democracy, because there are so many forms of democracy. Why are we unable to sustain it here? A lot of people don't realize it, but democracy as a governance or system, as a system of governance, is really, really young. Is really, really young. In fact, there are some scholars who claim that one of the biggest impacts of the First World War was to save democracy. And in Europe and then in Africa, when you consider, let's say, one of the most important impacts of the Second World War was to guarantee the concept of democracy as the governance system of choice in Western Europe, and to a large extent in Africa. In Africa, after the Second World War, we must recognize that there was a decolonization exercise. And that decolonization exercise started or gave us the opportunity to start our governance or our nation building exercise in a fairly democratic way. Ghana ourselves, even before we had independence in 1957, we had parties here. We had UDCC, we had the CPP, later we working to have the NLM and all the political parties. So we started off in a democratic way. Same with Europe. The question is, when you take Europe, as in a country that for a very long time had been ruled under authoritarianism. Because in Europe, if you study the history of Europe, they were being governed by totalitarian governments. As in when you take Britain and to a smaller extent, you take France, go to the Ottoman Empire, you talk about the Hungary, Austrian, and they were under systems that were undemocratic. Indeed, even though we see that after the First World War, democracy won. By 1939, as in before the Second World War, Germany, France, Germany, Italy, Spain were all under some form of fascist. So you have Italy under Mussolini, you had Spain under General Franco, you had Germany under Adolf Hitler. You go to Central and Eastern Europe, and they were all, as in democracy had failed there. Now the question that we should consider: what has sustained, to a large extent, the democratic system being practiced in Western Europe, as against what we are doing here in Africa? I think to answer that question, you first of all need to understand what democracy is, real democracy is. And then when we understand what real democracy is, then we look at what sustains real democracy, and then most critically, what is the end of real democracy. You understand? And you talk about real democracy, you talk about democracy. I know scholars will mention Aristotle and all, but I think in the midst of the American Civil War, during the burial at Gettysburg, Abraham Lincoln gave a speech which at that time was given very little thought. People gave little thought to. But when I was going, that was one of the greatest speeches, where he said that we should ensure that the lives that have been buried, the blood that has been spilled on the fields throughout America, will not be in vain, and that those bloods would attain what has become known as the definition of democracy: government by the people, of the people, and for the people. You understand? Now, when you go beyond that, in simple terms, when you talk about democracy, you are talking about a representative government by law. There's a government that is representative and by law, and we are talking about the people. So the people themselves will choose their governments. Now, the next question is, how do you sustain it? I think to sustain democracy largely depends on the political culture you create, and that political culture must be a culture that tolerates or allows. I should even use the word tolerate, but it must be a political culture that allows for open disagreements and a demand for accountability. You understand? To sustain democracy, then you must create a political culture. You must create a political culture that allows for open disagreement. And so I should be able to meet with Basintale, Jifa, and Uncle Siprat, and we can have open disagreements, debates. Open one, you understand? It must allow that without resorting to blows, and you understand. And two, it must demand accountability. And you see, when it comes to a system that allows for open disagreement, this concept finds itself in one of the core values of liberal democracy. It finds itself in one of the core. So when you read John Locke's views on liberal democracy, John Locke is largely agreed as the father of liberal democracy. It talks about one of the core values is pluralism. Because then for you to have a system that works, then you must have a system where there are very diverse political views. Because it cannot be possible for there to be only just one political view, especially so when all human beings are independent. We're all independent in our thought, in our values, and all. And also, liberal democracy believes in the principle of tolerance. You understand? Secondly, then we must also understand that we must hold those who govern us accountable. Now, then how do you forge this political culture? Political culture is forged by political institutions. When you talk about political institutions, we are talking about the state. But most importantly, we are talking about the political parties. Because to forge that culture, then you need a system that can mobilize public opinion, you understand, towards a certain value set. Now, with all the coup d'etats happening, my number one concern is Ghana. Because then we have talked about political culture, we have talked about the institutions. Now, the two of them, so the political institutions mobilizing public opinion to forge a certain culture, political culture, must be towards the ends of democracy. And what's that end? One, democracy, as in the political culture, the political institution, must be able to forge or guarantee the principles of the rule of law. And two, it must lead to an inclusive economic prosperity, whether individually or communally. You understand? I know my friends in the social democracy would add social justice. You understand? But that must be the ends of democracy. Now, when we come to Ghana, well, when we talk about the political institutions, I think the most critical one is the political parties. They are most critical. So today I'm going to narrow down the political parties and the roles in which our political parties in Ghana here are creating the political culture of Ghana, and how that has a potential to either sustain or cause us to lose our democracy. So the point is, how strong are the major political parties in Ghana? How strong is my own NPP? Now, when you take the NPP, and I'm going to deem my fearsome. It's so easy for me to talk about the NDC, but I think it's proper that I talk about my own NPP. It's proper and it's just right. That because the Bible says that you take the log out of your eye before you think about what is happening in somebody else. Now, you take the NPP, you read our constitution, and what the constitution does, especially the preamble, it tells you the value set of that political body, of that political institution. Now, NPP is a political party that touts its liberal democratic values or ideals. Talk about freedom of conscience, talk about freedom of speech, talk about liberal democracy, and people just talk about liberal democracy. But liberal democracy is a set of values. You understand? It's a set of principles that when you exude, when you show, somebody sitting back and say that, yes, that's a liberal democrat. Can you reasonably say that the NPP as it is now really exude those values in the way we have behaved, or in the way we are behaving? I was privileged to have seen and followed Stanley politics in Ghana since '92, and when the ban on democracy or the ban on political parties was lifted in '92, a lot of parties came up. My own father was a member of the NIP at that time. Like I say, I'm NPP, but my family, my father was an avowed CPP man. I have a lot of siblings who are CPP. And yet in my family, because of my personal political, even though our qualitative family, I'm allowed to have my own views, which are not in line with the CPP per se. But that NPP that was forged, that NPP that was forged, represented the values of liberal democracy, the values of tolerance, a belief that those that must govern must do so with the consent of the governed at all levels. Believe in the principle of tolerance. Now, that value set won us elections in 2000. That value set won us election in 2000. Now, I think the NPP after 2008, when we lost the 2008, I think that there has been a concerted effort to change the value set of the party. And I keep on hammering on the value set because, you see, the value set, the principles, the ideals of the party can affect the political culture of the country, because what the party has is it has the machinery that's able to mobilize the public opinion towards a certain value set. So after 2008, if we are going to be honest, if you are going to be critical, the NPP changed. Certain things have happened after 2008 I'd never seen or never imagined could happen in the NPP. Remember in 2009 when we went to amend the constitution as a very intellectual exercise, people were actually beaten. Remember the formation of the invisible forces and the mayhem and the evil that so-called group has meted out on their own NPP people. We talk about the violence that was meted out on certain supporters of Alan John Kodo Chamantin in 2008. that led to one Nana Kwame, very strong, viable young man, whose right now has lost his ability to speak. You understand? Talk about certain utterances like Odabidai. Talk about issues about the coup d'etat, a focus coup d'etat. And what is worrying for me was the acceptance of all those actions that were clear violations of the values of the party. Now, my personal view is that this current NPP is not a liberal democratic party. And I'm so fortified in that belief based on what happened on Wednesday. Because like I said, the political institution, the political culture, the two of them working together must guarantee the rule of law. You know that one of the abominations of the rule of law are acts of arbitrariness. As in when you act as in when you behave as if you don't have your powers cannot be, or is not limited. Right now, the council, the National Council, is behaving like it is powers unto themselves. I heard the General Secretary talk about what's it called, the fact that because there was no provision in the Constitution about what should be done when the elections held started, where there was a tie. Because there's no provision, then they can take that arbitrary action they took by deciding on a new college to effect that election. That's against the rule of law. Because when you go to England, when you go to the UK, they don't have a written constitution. And yet they can tell you that a certain act is unconstitutional. Why? Because there are principles, there are values that dictate how constitutions ought to be, that rules ought to be. And one of the abiding principles is the rule of law. And the fact that you cannot make rules, you understand, you cannot make rules and have them take, affect acts that are passed. It's so fundamental. I think that our party now is being governed by the value, the culture of Machiavellianism. Now, what does that value say? That value says the end justifies the means. It says the end justifies the means. So it does not matter how you get the end. You will get to the end. It does not matter how you get power. You understand? And also to add here, that there's a difference between power and authority. The difference between power and authority is that authority has legitimacy. Power by itself may not have that legitimacy, and so you can have power and not have authority. But we have been ruled, or the culture has been a culture of Machiavellianism. That's it, that the end justifies the means. So then what this means is that you do not care to breach a fundamental principle like consent. Because when you go into an election and you pay money to secure votes, then you don't really have the consent of the people you are going to govern them. You do not. Because one of the fundamental principles of law is that consent will be vitiated by undue influence and by duress. When you go and use intimidation, brute force, to secure the consent of the governed, so you govern them, then that consent was not there. I hope you understand. And so the point I'm trying to make is that right now the value set of the NPP is a Machiavellian policy or principle that says that insofar as we can get power, the end being power, it does not matter how that power is gotten. And I beg to differ, and it must not be accepted. For my worry is that these values that are variant to our values, our touted values of liberal democracy, we the people, we seem to accept it. That's my concern. Because you see, the problems we are facing as a country is because of that concept that says the end justifies the means. And so the end is power. Beyond the power, what happens? Because clearly, if you understand politics, if you are guided by conviction, then you should understand that in politics, the power is the beginning, it's not the end. That if our African leaders understood that acquiring power is the beginning, is a vehicle, it's a vehicle to a certain goal. What's that goal? That goal is to create a community where you have social justice, a community where individual dreams and goals economically can be attained, a community where my liberty, my right to speak is guaranteed. And you understand? A society where I can vent, a society where I can openly disagree with you. You understand? Now, when you understand that power is the beginning, then when you have been given that power, your commitment will be using that power to drive your agenda to that end. Now, and I'll call all my NPP people, go into our constitution, read the purpose, the objectives of the new patriotic party, juxtaposed against the policy direction that our so-called NPP government has granted us and decide whether this is truly an NPP party. Whether or not the party has not been taken over by charlatans who do not share those values, who do not believe in those principles, who have no commitment, no fidelity to the principles of liberal democracy, who have pretended to believe in those principles, use propaganda and the power to mobilize public opinion to capture the party. And they are delivering a program which do not represent what the party stands for. Why am I saying that? You take the economic direction that we have been as a country we've been led over the past 7 years. Can you reasonably say that they represent what NPP, what the UP tradition has promised since what's called the 50s? Do they represent that? You go into a concept, you believe that government should not be centralized; it should be decentralized. You go into a constitution, we talk that one of the fundamental duties of the new patriotic party, any government is to protect the environmental integrity of this nation. You look at the menace, the evil that we've sat down and allowed Galamsey to do to the environment. And you say, can you justify it being a government whose conscience says that it believes in the protection of the environment? You talk about a government that, an idea that believes in the empowerment of the private sector. What have we done to build that private sector? When we spend 2.1 billion on Coup and just 400 million on 1D1F. You talk about, as there's a belief that there's a need to build SMEs, because we believe that when you have a strong SME base, then you can deliver the employment. You're able to generate the revenue that you need. What has been our commitment to these values? You understand? So, as a not to take all the time, there are things that sustain democracy. We should not take the democracy we have for granted. There are things that sustain democracy. And one of it is political culture. And the people that drive that political culture are the political institutions, and most importantly, the political parties. I think, for me, my interest is to deal with my own people. Let us have an introspection. Let us in the NPP have a deep introspection into what we've become now. Let's have an honest introspection, and see whether the acts of brutality that were meted on Ali, even on ourselves, in just a mere super delegates, on how we've conducted ourselves over the past since 2008, and have a renewal to the values of liberal democracy. And it's not because I'm a conspiracy, maybe that's what I'm going to say that, but right now, no matter how people saw him in the 90s, in the 2000s, but he's one of the most respected political figures in this country. Why? Because he's held true to his political values. No matter what, as I can predict, if you are going to be honest, you can predict what Uncle Kusi's party's thinking will be on every issue. There has been a consistency. And that's what I always say, and I've said it here before, that principles don't change. If you really believe in principles, if you really believe in values, they don't change. You understand? So let we, the political actors, I'm calling on my party, but same with the NDC. Let them understand the values that brought them together as a political party. Let them stay true to those values. Let them renew their commitments to those values. When we've done that, then we can, together as political parties, create a political culture in this country that will not tolerate tribalism. I tell you, it's a worry. You can go and look through the political figures of Ghana since 1957. In the 50s, we all know that NPP has a stronghold in the Ashanti region. But this is the only time when we are making over 75% votes in Ashanti region. During Nkrumah's time, the UP never made more than 65%. JJ Rollins. Why? Because right now, increasing, the country is becoming very tribal. You go to the water region, it's like everybody in the Ashanti region thinks a certain way, or everybody in the water region thinks a certain way. When people go out to canvass votes and then the only message is that vote for me because I'm from this tribe. What kind of political culture is that? Especially when you know that one of the biggest problems that African democracies are having is because of the tribal nature in which our countries were forged. So you must, when you are a leader, a political leader, you must have a policy or an attempt to forge a culture that will whittle down the impact of tribalism. Because at the end of the day, you want to be driven by values, by principles, not merely by where you were born. So just to end, we have an opportunity. You see what is happening all across Africa. And like I said, the reason why the coup d'etats are happening is because they fail to create the right political culture. One, they've taken their eyeball as to the purpose or the reasons for their governance. And because of that, they are failing to deliver on the promise of democracy. Let us, both NPP and NDC and all the politicians in this country, be focused to the creation of the right political culture. A culture that will tolerate open disagreement. A culture that will demand accountability. And when we've done that, then we, together, both the culture and the institutions, guarantee the rule of law and also delivers on the economic promise we made to the people of the country. When we have done that, then democracy will stay forever and ever. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a good one. Let me just go to this Tafari number here. I would say, now that these French speaking African countries are moving away from their colonial masters, what will happen to their monies that are being kept by France central bank? Because you know all the French speaking countries don't have their own central bank. It's the French government that keeps their own money for them. That's from Tafa and Amrahia. A few messages on Facebook. This Lengi Chawinati, it said, be careful of what you wish. Nanado wished the Arab Spring for Mahama. Now he's drawing closer to his regime. I wish him well. And then there's Nananumba Berma says, the thing with our African system is presidency can now be bought to the highest bidder and not for the one with integrity. There's is it Corey Kuzimbe, CK Milanian, who says Pan-African television, the arbitrariness of suspension of party members is evidence of the erosion of the value system of the NPP. There's this one from Patrick Akko, who says we are not able to sustain real democracy because of the manner we align ourselves to political parties. If we desist from belonging to political parties in the same way we belong to our ethnic groups, we cannot get the best from democracy. Look at how a policeman can look into the face of the Commission of Inquiry made up of members of parliament and say he can't talk about the conversation he had because what they discussed was private. Is this police officer telling Ghanaians that a suspect can tell the court that what he's suspected to have said or have done was private, so he cannot talk about it in court? It looks like nobody sees anything wrong with the posture of the police officer. That's Patrick Akko joining us. Gafaro Janton Dabosh is joining us, says, our African leaders should learn a lesson about what is going on. The so-called ECOWAS should tell our leaders that being democratic is not to enrich themselves. Abiy Mandela says African leaders are greedy and don't think about the welfare of their citizens. Reason for the military takeover we have witnessed over the period. Coup is not necessarily bad if it's meant to liberate and free citizens and clear the system of corrupt and wicked leadership. Eriko Kusapano is also joining us. Those West African leaders who are beating the war drums of intervention in Niger, where are they? By now, they are shaking in fear of their own shadow. Richard Larson, when you destroy someone's life with lies, take it as a loan. It will come to you with interest. There's confidence, as Zrako Eche says, for the purposes, the nation is my greatest concern is about the conduct, the independence, and transparency of the Electoral Commission. Look, Sana, what the EC is intending to do, if care is not taken, Ghana will be jeopardized. And again, the plot to oust the IGP is a serious issue we should be concerned about. Where on earth can a professional COP admit that there are political police? We have to take this matter serious. Thank you. So please take your time and type and send to me so that it is easier for me to read, because sometimes I have to edit you as I go along. Richard Allah is also joining us. Says, okay, he has other things on his mind. So there's Francis Gordon, who says, French Africa is in crisis recently, mostly due to greed and the change of the constitution by governments to mandatory third term, coupled with rigging of elections by those who came in through the same democratic electoral process. The definition of democracy is different in most African countries. When there's trouble, we hear, make noise. Sana, God save Africa. James Wawa says, Gabon's coup is a chariot. Since when did family affair become a proper coup? The junta leader is a cousin of Bongo's family. Don't jubilate. It's still Bongo's family which continues. And let me end with Daniel Akpaliok, who says, today ECOWAS will learn to tread with caution as far as the coup in Gabon is concerned. The poster of diplomacy exhibited by ECOWAS regarding the happenings in Niger clearly shows their appreciation of the dogma of diplomacy is weak. This clearly could be seen in their utterances. The ECOWAS leadership should, as a matter of urgency, tone down their irritative utterances and resort to dialogue to channel their grievances to the military juntas involved. The Nigerian junta has taught ECOWAS that going forward, diplomacy must be pursued to its logical conclusion if they really want to address the problem of coups devoid of mass destruction of life.
PENDREAM TV now, so far so good. Say open online portal e Ghana. Nipa share, nipa follow, nipa comment here. To my best of knowledge, without any biases, PENDREAM TV.